students, to our third presentation on Science and Technology Teaching in the Foundation Phase, LSK3701. This is Learning Unit 2. I am your lecturer, Mrs. A. Carrim, and you can email me on ecarrier1@unisa.ac.za. So today is all about Learning Unit 2, which is the components of science learning. After you have completed this learning unit, you should be able to identify scientific concepts and science process skills in science investigations and cite appropriate examples to demonstrate your understanding of scientific concepts and science process skills, and also to explain how scientific investigative skills affect children's understanding of the nature of science and scientific literacy. You can use scenarios to basically identify, interpret, and analyze children's thinking processes in the learning of science. So remember, the key concepts in this learning unit are science process skills, science investigation, scientific concepts, knowledge trends, big ideas, habits of mind, and habits of body. In the previous learning unit, you were introduced to what science is. In other words, it's nature. You learned that young learners develop their ideas about the nature of science through developing scientific literacy. So in this unit, you will be introduced to the components of science that are taught in the foundation phase to facilitate the development of learners' scientific literacy. So while you study this unit, you will develop science content knowledge that is necessary for teaching science in the foundation phase. You will obtain most of this content knowledge yourself from magazines, newspapers, libraries, and the internet. So the science topics that must be taught are stated in the curriculum documents. The topics are typically categorized into one of the science knowledge trends that you will learn later in this chapter. And just remember, the CAPS document is very important. So what principles influence science teaching in the foundation phase? Remember, you get your NCS, your Natural Sciences 2002, where you get your learning outcome one, basically the science investigations, as well as your process skills to use, and then your CAPS life skills for the foundation phase, the 2011 edition, where you get natural science knowledge trends listed as natural science concepts, the beginning knowledge topics, and big ideas listed as social science concepts. So remember, we need to understand that these documents take the position and they guide how we should teach. So the beginning knowledge section of the curriculum and assessment policy statement, the CAPS document, life skills for the foundation phase, is very important that you download and that you have in your possession so that you can easily refer to it. And the national curriculum statement, NCS, Natural Sciences, are the documents which are very important, and it basically influences the content that we teach in the classroom. So this is very important that you understand. These are the principles underlying the science teaching in the foundation phase. If you have a copy of these or don't have a copy of these, please download it. I will try and add this to the additional resources as well so that you have easy access. Okay, young learners' thinking processes in science. I know you must have gathered from Learning Unit 1 that it's very important that we understand our young learners' thinking. So in this Learning Unit 1, in Learning Unit 1, you were introduced to how scientific concepts develop in the brains of young learners when they engage in learning activities, and which leads to the development of their scientific literacy. So the notion of conceptual development in the learning of science in young learners will form the basis of our further discussion of what must be taught and how science should be taught. So you need to know, what do you understand by the information processing model? Remember, this will be used to explain the teaching approaches, the principles and concepts that apply to foundation phase science in South African schools. There's a diagram that I think in the next slide you will see, but it's on figure 2.2 on page 27 in your study guide. It's important that you go through it and understand it. And also this model basically shows that information from the environment is registered in a learner's immediate memory, and then passed on to his working memory for processing, in terms of thinking, reasoning, problem solving. So if a learner attaches sense and meaning to the learning, what happens to the information? Remember, the information is likely to be stored for later use, where they can think, reason, and problem solve. And also, you need to know what type of activities, should teachers create. Teachers must need to ensure that they present science activities that develop sense and meaning making, you know. So what will determine how much attention learners give to new information? Remember, it's very important that learners' self-concept will determine, how much attention they give to the new information. Um, and later we all also explain that one way of motivating learners, you need to understand how they can become active in their own learning. It's basically to allow them to ask questions about a topic and to find the answers to their questions. We've spoken about this in Learning Unit 1. Can you see how it moves on, and we gain more detail about the importance. So what do you remember about the role of working memory? Remember, the working memory is important in reading. If too much working memory is used for actual reading, then too little working memory is available to move, to encode the information into long-term memory. So you need to understand what is encoding. It requires causal reasoning to make the links between the concepts so that the theory of a concept can be developed. So during causal reasoning, naive theories develop into a more scientific theories. And we also need to understand what factors are influence science thinking and learning. And this is very important, that you need to understand the habits of body, the habits of mind, big concepts, process skills. These are very important in lesson planning and theme planning. And you will see how important it is in this module as you get to the other learning units and, within the assignments and exam. So how can you as a teacher find out about what learners know about the world? So remember, um, young learners will probably know about insects that they have seen flying around in their gardens. They may have parents who talk to them about and show them the wonder of nature and the world around them. So they don't get the first understanding of certain things from their teachers. They may have been perhaps stung by a bee or a wasp. So their guardians or their parents might have told them to be careful when they drink, cold drink from a can, because bees are attracted to sugary solutions. So if you notice, they do have some sort of understanding. So they may have seen ants carrying crumbs, they may have seen cockroaches in their homes. Their parents may have described them as being busy as a bee. So they would insinuate that bees are very busy. So, and also there's so many films about like Maya the bee, or their parents may have read them stories about insects. So there are many ways that children learn about the world. And as a teacher, we need to first find out what learners know about the world, and that's when we and let as many learners as possible tell you what they know. Remember, you have a class of 37, so there's all different scenarios, all different understandings, and it's actually interesting as a foundation phase teacher to hear all the initial naive understandings of certain things. It actually makes the classroom environment fun, and that's when you start processing new information and getting them understanding in a more factual light. Okay, so how does culture influence learning? Remember that children bring with them their own cultural knowledge, stories, and ideas that may be unique to their specific culture. We also need to understand why is it important, for teachers to draw a concept map of what what learners know before they start teaching. So it's always a good idea to draw a concept map of what learners know, because a concept map is a line of diagram that it basically connects the idea. So you'll find information about concept maps in additional resources as well. And also, why is it important to ask learners what they would like to know about the topic? Remember, for example, there's so many students in the classroom and they all have this wonder, they wonder, they think about insects, or what would they like? You want to know what they would like to know. These wonderings or questions should be put maybe on a wonder wall. In foundation phase classrooms, there's always this wonder wall. The wonderings or questions are the questions that learners want answered, and we as teachers motivate them to learn in this way. So when you teach the topic, you should see how many of these questions, can be answered. At the end of the topic, you should draw another concept map perhaps to see how the learner's understanding of the topic has changed through your teaching. And also go back to the wonder wall and see if some questions have been, answered or what has not been answered as yet. So that's very important also. Why is it important for teachers to show an interest in the learning of science? Remember, if you show interest and you make you show that this topic has so much to there's so much to learn, and you put in effort with resources, with whether it's a video, a book, all of this creates interest in the learning of science. So think of an example of teaching a science topic. How would you go about grouping or classifying information into groups of similarity, to encourage understanding? Remember, when it comes to insects such as bees, wasps, butterflies, ants, cockroaches, they all have 6 legs. They may or may not have wings, but they all have exoskeleton. So some of them, they do not have lungs to breathe, but have a network of tiny tubes. So this is in science, we group or classify all living into larger and larger groups of similarity. So in our example, we could classify different insects, in terms of spiders, worms, whatever it is, and make them understand these insects in a bit more detail. So think of topics that you can go through with your students. If you think that you have a very limited understanding of insects, you may want to look at books, on insects from your local library or the internet. As teachers, we constantly learning, we constantly picking up more resources in the, so that we can give the best to our learners and give them a broader understanding of the science topics and develop a good scientific thinking in our young learners. Okay, so this is the diagram I spoke about on page, I think it was figure 2.2, page 27. So this diagram shows that information from the environment is registered in a learner's immediate memory and then passed on to his or her working memory for processing, in terms of thinking, reasoning, and problem solving. So the environment, learners can explore, observe through sight, hearing, touch, smell, taste. And this is obviously things that go into the immediate memory and maybe from their past experience and into their working memory. And this is when they start making sense of things and encoding, to long-term memory. And they develop the self-concept that actually keeps it in a long-term storage. So it's good that we get to this process, because once they start observing and it's just in the immediate memory, they can start forgetting, and it's not something that would be long-term for them to understand and make sense of and problem solve and all the things we want them to do in our activities in the classroom. Okay, so the factors that influence science thinking and learning, like we said, are habits of body, habits of mind, big concepts, process skills. Now, this is just a brief summary of everything in terms of, when it comes to habits of uh, body, this is your physical movement, your gross motor and sensory motor activities, your eye-hand coordination skills. So remember, as a teacher, you need to bring in some body movements where they maybe pretend to be caterpillars and then flourish into a butterfly, things like that. Habits of mind. We need to ensure that they be able to, strive for accuracy, listening with empathy, maybe to a story, thinking flexibly, with problem solving, applying past knowledge to new situations, and remaining open to continuous learning. And we want them to think independently and find humor in things, take responsible risks, and think and communicate with clarity. So this is all a very important process in the learning of science. And then we have the big concepts, which is conservation, cause and effect, place, change, adaptation, relationships and interdependence, and diversity and individuality. You need to understand this, in order to be able to apply it in your lesson planning, in your theme plans. And then when it comes to process skills, observing, comparing, classifying, measuring, communicating, gathering and organizing information, inferring and predicting, hypothesis, separating variables. So these are very important for you to ensure that science thinking and learning is developed in a broader light, and that they're able to investigate science and just create really good interactive lessons of inquiry. Okay, so when you're going through these this information in learning unit 2, I want you to ask yourself these questions. What are concepts referred to? So remember, concepts are building blocks of knowledge. They allow people to organize and categorize information and can be applied to the solution of new problems in everyday experience, you know. And also, what opportunity does teaching for conceptual change do for learners? So remember, you should revise the unit that we did before to develop a good understanding of what a concept is, and also remember that teaching for conceptual change means that learners are given the opportunity to make observations, to ask questions about their observations, and to find answers to these questions by communicating their ideas. So you should also refer to the information processing model at all times to remind yourself of how children learn, you know. And when we're looking at, if you had to look at the first one, an understanding of the big concept conservation. Remember, conservation is the careful preservation or and protection of something. So in this context we refer to remember a natural resources that we want to prevent from being exploited, destructed, or neglected. An example of such conservation is water conservation. When humans store water in um, uh, dams and tanks, and they need to not waste water in their homes and the industry and not pollute water. All of that thinking. So when it comes to team planning, remember this is how conservation should be understood. And then we look at cause and effect. Remember, a cause is an event or an action that causes something else to happen. You know, remember, if we need to teach our students about healthy eating. If we eat too much or too much of the wrong type of food and we are inactive, we could become obese. But if we eat too much sugar-based foods, we are at a higher risk of becoming diabetic. So all of this is important to teach them about cause and effect within our lessons. And then when it comes to place, we are all citizens of the world, and then of our continent, and then of our country, our town, our suburb. So we need to make our students understand that our place is important to us and what impact we have on the place we live in the world as a whole. So if we if we think of littering, for instance, then there's a problem. If students are not aware that they're not supposed to litter, and how it can affect the place they're staying in, make it dirty and unhealthy environment. So we want to even bring up things like recycling, how they can help the environment around them. Um, so think about this, in a more practical light, so that we can give them the knowledge they need, so that they can be good citizens of our country, of our place. So we're teaching them good habits. Change. The world is forever changing. Remember, think about the kind of world your grandparents and parents lived in. What do you think they did for entertainment? What did they buy? Where did they live? Do you think they live closer to the natural environment? So as time goes by, learners' experiences are different to what we may have experienced. So we need to also think about also illustrating, the concept of change, where the caterpillar changes from hatching from an egg, and then by eating a lot, getting bigger, and eventually changing into a butterfly or whatever it is. So that's also part of change. And then adaptation. Remember, continuous change necessitates continuous adaptation. So, when you go to a new place, you need to adapt to that situation. Or so there are many examples that you can consider, using the internet and other sources, and using children's science books, for examples, to show how someone or an animal had to adapt to environment. Some of them adapt more in darker environments, with less sun, and some need the shade, some need trees, all of that. So we need to think about all of this, how animals adapt to protect its family in a certain, in a certain environment. All of that is important. And then let's look at relationship and interdependence. Remember, we need to understand that um, children need to develop a sense of place in their society. So we need to think of different relationships, whether it's a teacher and a learner, a parent and a child, a worker and a boss, uh, you know, and how sometimes certain insects work together to, to build their homes or whatever it may be. So it's very important that we understand and be able to apply it in the context of whatever is given to you within your theme plan. Diversity and individuality. Remember, the life skills curriculum suggests that foundation phase learners should learn about diversity and individuality by thinking about how they are the same as they, classmates, and how they are different from one another. They are same in that they are human, and their body structures such as two arms, two legs, all of that, but they differ in their personalities, in their shape, in their eye color, their physical traits. So they all have unique fingerprints, in terms of DNA and blood type. Even though they are all different, they are all human. So we need to teach them about diversity and individuality. Whether even in a science topic, there's different species, and all of this is important so they can learn more about the natural environment and understand the diversity and individuality in terms of science topics. So that's very important for you to understand. And then when it comes to process skills, remember, process skills are also very important in planning, for our for basically for your lessons. So process skills are very important to actually investigate science. So remember, when it comes to process skills, you need to understand what does it mean to observe. What does it mean to observe? We receive information about the world around us, so learners need to find activities that allow them to use their senses, such as sight, sound, smell, touch, taste. So observation is the most fundamental process skill for the study of science. So teachers' questions will help ensure that learners don't just see, but they observe. When learners, for example, look at a fish in a fish tank, they would see the fish, but will they observe what is happening in the tank? So as teachers, we should ask questions like which fish is always at the bottom, which would lead to different kind of seeing. So it could lead to learners making guesses about why it is so. So remember, we need to be part of that process. When it's comparing, we teachers should ask questions to encourage learners to find the similarities and differences between objects. Whether it be fruits or in terms of colors, shapes, or whatever the case may be. And then when it comes to classifying, remember, classification in science learning begins when children sort and group real objects. So, we can also they can basically group, all the red fruit, all the orange fruit together. So think of this when you are doing activities in your classroom according to your specific science topic. Measuring, this is where we quantifying observation. So it is a way of explaining the world mathematically. So at first, children learn the difference between short and long, for example, and then they will be able to, think of how tall a giraffe is, or whatever the topic is. So towards the end of foundation phase, learners will use formal measurements such as meters and centimeters. So this is how we start the process. When it comes to communicating, remember, we communicate. It's very important that we allow students to communicate, whether orally or in written form, by means of pictures, maps, graphs, tables. So during communication, we as teachers need to question learners to allow them to communicate through these methods, and give them drawing activities or even creative writing activities such as poems and dramas that make lessons more interesting and bring it more to life. And then gathering and organizing information. Remember, this is where we also look at the 16 habits of mind, which we will talk about. So when one gathers data, they basically, we want them to strive for accuracy, not only in collecting data, but also communicating it. So as teachers, we should teach young learners how to record their findings, whether in tables, graphs, and this is also very important for students in, to also learn at the same time mathematical concepts. So Inferring and predicting. Remember the we with the within the habits of mind, we want them to take risks, to make a prediction is very necessary for understanding the cause and effect that we were talking about previously. So prediction is basically, for example, if students, we tell them to pick up one brick, it will be heavy. If you pick up two bricks, it will be twice as heavy. So three bricks will be three times as heavy, and so on. So the ability to recognize patterns is important, for reading and numeracy of our students. Also, if you, for example, if you go to the doctor, um, because you have a high temperature and red spots observation, the doctor will make an inference that because of your high temperature, it's a measles virus because you have red spots all over. So the doctor does these observations to make meaning of something. So remember, we can predict what it could be, but through testing and things like that, you will understand it better. So this is where you form a hypothesis. Remember, for an investigation, we need to have experiments in our classrooms, and it must have a hypothesis and variables. And this is how students can basically form a relationship between two variables. So if I increase the number of bricks, the weight of the bricks will increase. So we need to make them develop scientific questions here. So does the weight of the bricks increase as you increase the weight of bricks increase as you increase the number of bricks? So there is better examples that you can come up with to understand it better. I'm just giving just a brief understanding of these so that you can get started with your studying, or your, going through the module. Separating variables controlled to give a fair test. So in a simple experiment, only one variable can be tested. So remember, if you look at independent variables, dependent variables, fixed variables. So when we return to the example of bricks, so the number of bricks is changed or increased, that's the independent variable. When you are measuring the weight of the bricks, that is your dependent variable, which depends basically on the number of bricks. And the fixed variable are that the bricks must be the same size and made of the same material. Remember, we can't compare cement bricks with clay bricks. The size and the material of the bricks must be fixed. So on the basis of this understanding of hypotheses and variables, we need to understand this, right? And then you can develop scientific questions, and it creates a good lesson in the classroom. Let's look at habits of mind and body. That's also very important that you understand what are habits of mind. These are questions that I've derived so that while you're reading through the module, you start asking yourself questions to form a better understanding. So habits of mind are basically the 16 characteristics of good problem solving, you know and obviously the habits of mind model refers to the characteristics, like I mentioned earlier. And if we strive for an education system that aims to develop learners' problem solving skills, it makes sense to include learning activities that develop these characteristics. We need them to be persistent, need them to manage the impulsivity, listen with empathy, whether it's be a story, think flexibly, think independently, create and innovate, whether it be a recycling process to help with littering, gathering data, taking responsible risks, like we spoke about. So remember, this is very important for you to understand this table 2.2 of habits of mind of good problem solvers on page 41. Your pages may differ. It just depends on the online. I'm using a hard copy. You might have to look up meaning of some of these words or phrases. Make sure you understand each of the 16 habits of mind of good problem solving in order to apply it. So remember, these habits of mind are relevant not only for developing problem solving activities for learners, but developing higher order thinking and creativity. Do you remember Bloom's taxonomy? If not, go online and revise higher order thinking. It's very important that we get our students to be visualizers, experimenters, describers, representers, inventors. This is what we aiming for in our foundation phase classroom. I know the challenge for teachers or foundation phase learners is to find ways in which to develop all of these characteristics. It's easy to say, in young learners. But through science process skills, we can develop their scientific literacy in a more extensive light. And then we look at habits of body. Um, Remember, the habits of body is very important. It basically connects understanding with movement, and it's linked to cognitive development in the brain. Young learners learn science not only through formal settings such as a classroom, classroom activities, but also through play. So during play, children will move their bodies, they will explore the environment. They get practice in coordinating movements and processing. So all of this is very important, for to develop their gross motor skills, fine motor skills, eye-hand coordination, visual perceptual skills. So as teachers, we need to be aware of the importance of play activities and later learning, and should also provide. We should provide young learners with the space and opportunity to play and to use objects. And also, create like I said previously, from a caterpillar into a butterfly, things like that make the classroom much more interesting. Okay, so now we're looking at scientific knowledge. Scientific knowledge is very important to understand, especially in the CAPS document. So the CAPS life skills for the foundation phase, the 2011 edition, will talk about life and living. Remember, life and living would be content like animals and plants and the environment, all of that. When it comes to planet Earth and beyond, it would be things like soil, water, air, stars, planets. Energy and change would be things like forces, movement, and energy. And matter and materials will be basically the nature of materials. So remember, each content focuses on scientific facts, concepts, principles, theories, and it's important for learners to know, understand, so as foundation phase teachers, we should know, the what should know our learners and the level at which they can understand scientific concepts. Example, something like photosynthesis. Foundation phase teachers need to understand that we can't expect foundation phase learners to know about it, the different stages, and the chemical processes. All of this is very complicated for our young learners, so we need to start with with words that will make them make meaning of concepts. And this all happens in the brain, like we said, so we need to consider all of this. Young learners have conceptual understanding, um, and obviously the intuitive understanding develops from the understanding they develop on the basis of their senses. So all of this is kind of linked together. So I want you to go through these questions that I've created while you're going through the learning unit, and this is how you'll develop a good understanding of scientific knowledge. And please also check the table 2.1 on page 40, where you see the relationship between curriculum topics, knowledge trends, intuitive knowledge, and social science ideas, because you will be given theme plans and topics where I will expect you to classify what science content trend it is part of, and this is how you can lose marks if you don't understand it. Okay, so that's about it for Learning Unit 2. Remember that I want you to please make sure that you put the necessary effort in the learning units, work through the activities. You can always ask for additional support if you require. There's discussion forums created on the module site. So while you study this unit, I'm sure you developed science content knowledge, particularly about how to teach in the foundation phase. Since it's not possible to deal with all science content in a single module, you need to develop curiosity about the world around you. Furthermore, your science content knowledge is likely to increase as you develop learning activities for your foundation phase classes. So remember, as you go along, you will be more updated and more informed on all of this and how to apply it. So in this unit, you are basically introduced to big concepts as organizers of science knowledge that facilitate the understanding across topics. Remember, process skills in the learning of science were also explained, and you were shown how these skills can develop your scientific investigations that you create for students. You also learn that the science topics that must be taught are found in the specific curriculum documents, and the topics are typically categorized into one of the knowledge strands of science. So the following unit sets out, how teaching of science and the assessment of learners are planned and how you can carry them out. So the theoretical aspects of the first two units underpin how the how to basically of planning science activities for science learning and assessing learners to determine the actual understanding of science content and the ability to apply the science process skills within activities. So in learning unit 3, we will show you how to develop lesson plans, specifically inquiry based theme plans, and that's where you integrate language, mathematics, creative arts, and technology. And assessment activities are basically aimed at building learners' conceptual knowledge in relation to science. So I hope that this learning unit presentation of learning unit 2 helped you in some way. I'm just trying to get you started with these learning units. Remember, you need to work through your study guide, and this presentation is not sufficient for you to just listen to and expect to understand the content. You need to actually do the activities and work through the learning unit thoroughly. Thank you again. I hope to see you in my next presentation.